I never planned to overhear my own family plotting to humiliate me on Christmas Eve, but that's exactly what happened. 2 nights before the holiday, I stood outside the dining room, hidden behind a half-closed door, listening to my mother laugh as she described the skit they would use to embarrass me in front of the entire extended family and the church cameras. They wanted me dressed like a mechanic pushing a toy car while they listed all the ways I'd failed. My father called it a lesson. My siblings called it funny. So that night when my mother called me furious, breathless, demanding to know where I was, I simply said, "Yeah, quick question, Mom. Did you enjoy my gift?" Because I hadn't shown up to be their punchline. I sent the truth instead. If it were you, would you let your own family shame you publicly? Where are you listening from? At what time? Tell me. Because this Christmas, I'd like to know I'm not alone. When I tell people my family lives in Plano, Texas, they picture warm suburban comfort, big houses, trimmed lawns, smiling parents, and kids who grow up to become doctors or marry them. And honestly, that's exactly the fantasy my parents have curated for decades. The Carters aren't just any Plano family where the kind others point to as an example of discipline, achievement, and good upbringing. At least that's the image my parents fight desperately to maintain. My dad, Thomas Carter, built a small chain of high-end furniture stores across North Texas. At every dinner party, he likes to remind everyone he's self-made. Even though his own father lent him the money to open his first store and my mom's parents helped him buy the second, still he loves the story. The immigrant grind narrative, the bootstrap myth, the long hours, the sacrifices. Whether or not the numbers add up isn't the point. It's the brand. And in our house, everything is a brand, his business, our family image, even our emotions, which are usually polished into whatever photograph will play best on Facebook. My mother, Linda, is the executive producer of that facade. She's the kind of woman who buys seasonal decor in bulk, organizes church charity galas like military operations, and knows exactly which family should sit at which table during Christmas brunch to create the best optics. Growing up, I used to watch her adjusting centerpieces or fixing her lipstick before answering the door, even if she was just expecting neighbors dropping off cookies. Presentation matters, she'd say. People believe what they see. And in our family, people saw perfection. My older brother, Ryan, embodied it. At 32, he's an orthopedic surgeon, the golden child, the miracle boy who played varsity sports, went to med school, married a pretty blonde from church, and followed every step of my father's blueprint. Dad never says he has a favorite child, but he doesn't have to. When Ryan walks into a room, Dad's whole posture changes. His chest widens, his voice deepens, his pride radiates so intensely it's almost embarrassing to witness. And then there's Chloe, my little sister, 26, petite, luminous, a dental hygienist who works part-time but brands herself full-time as a lifestyle content creator. She posts perfect brunch shots, outfit grids, makeup routines, and day-in-my-life videos of errands that somehow look like luxury commercials. Mom is obsessed with her, constantly fixing her hair, buying her clothes, photographing her at every angle like she's sculpting a porcelain doll. My baby girl, she calls her, as if Chloe were a fragile ornament that must always shine. Both Ryan and Chloe fit our family's aesthetic. Clean, polished, white coat professions or careers adjacent to them. Meanwhile, I, Maya, 29, have always been the glitch in the Carter algorithm. When I was younger, I loved math, science, anything mechanical. I could take apart a lawnmower at 15 and rebuild it in a weekend. Teachers pushed me toward Harvard, Yale, engineering programs, law school, anything prestigious. My parents saw me the same way. I was supposed to become the lawyer or the consultant, the one who completed their trio of shining children. They bragged about my test scores before I even took the tests. So, when I announced that I wanted to study automotive engineering at UT Austin and eventually become a mechanic, the silence at the dinner table was so violent it felt like a physical blow. My dad dropped his fork. My mom blinked slowly, as if I'd told her I planned to join a circus. Ryan tried to hide a laugh behind his water glass. Chloe straight up snorted. "Why would you waste your potential like that?" Dad finally said, "People like us don't do that kind of work." Mom was blunter. "We didn't sacrifice everything so you could smell like motor oil." That line stuck with me. She said it again years later after I opened my repair shop. As if the worst thing a daughter could do was be useful in a way that wasn't photogenic. Ryan and Chloe treated my career like a running joke. At family dinners, they'd make comments like, "So, how's the grease pit?" Or "Did you fix any fancy tractors this week?" Always with that half-pitying, half-amused tone. They weren't even trying to be cruel. They genuinely believed they were teasing the quirky sibling who had chosen an inferior path. But the truth was, I loved the work. I loved helping single moms who couldn't afford dealership prices, delivery drivers who relied on their cars to pay rent, college kids scared they were being scammed by big auto shops. My customers weren't glamorous, but they were real. They were grateful, and they made me feel like I belonged somewhere. Still, in the Carter household, none of that mattered. Success had a very specific definition. A degree you could frame, a title you could flaunt, a salary high enough to buy things my mother could brag about, and a lifestyle curated for Instagram. A daughter who owned a repair shop, who wore jeans stained with grease, who worked with her hands, who knew the sound of an engine misfiring before it even started didn't fit the picture. I wasn't just the odd one out. I was the flaw in their portrait, the smudge they tried to crop out whenever possible. And when you grow up in a family obsessed with image, being the smudge doesn't just make you invisible. It turns you into something they feel compelled to fix, reshape, or quietly erase. That's why when I overheard their plan 2 weeks before Christmas, the jokes, the costumes, the lesson they wanted to teach me, it hurt in a way that wasn't new, but deeper. It was the final confirmation that in my parents' eyes, my whole life had become an inconvenience to their brand, and I had finally reached the point where I was done being their flaw. If there's one thing I learned early, it's that passion doesn't need permission. It doesn't wait for approval. And it definitely doesn't care if your parents think it fits their Instagram aesthetic. I discovered mine the first semester I moved to Austin for college. While other students decorated dorm rooms with fairy lights and sorority paddles, I spent my afternoons in the engineering building, elbow-deep in combustion systems, and my weekends working part-time at a tiny auto shop off Burnett Road. I loved everything about it. The hum of engines, the raw honesty of machines, the way a car could go from broken to alive again because I understood what it needed. Austin was the first place I ever felt free. Free from Plano perfection, free from my mother's constant need for polished appearances, free from the subtle but sharp reminders that I was the different one. I rode my old Honda Civic across long stretches of Texas highways with the windows down, music blasting so loud I could feel it in my ribs. That feeling the wind, the hum of the engine, the sense that the road had no judgment was a freedom no one could take from me. My parents, however, reacted as if I had personally offended the entire Carter bloodline. When they thought I wasn't listening, I overheard my dad muttering to my mom, "Of all the majors, mechanical engineering, she's throwing away her future." My mother didn't hide her disappointment at all. She responded with her trademark coldness, clipped words, strained smiles, long silences during our Sunday FaceTime calls. She and my father gradually reduced financial support, framing it as encouraging independence. But we all knew it was punishment. Before letting me leave for Austin, they even made me sign a handwritten agreement that I would get an MBA within 5 years to keep my options open. It wasn't a legal document, just a leash disguised as concern. But for once in my life, their disapproval didn't stop me. After graduation, I moved back to Dallas and worked full-time at another garage, a bigger one this time, where I learned not only technical skills, but how to talk to customers, how to diagnose issues quickly, how to run a front-of-house operation. I saved every spare dollar, slept in a tiny apartment above a laundromat, and slowly developed a vision for a place that felt nothing like the intimidating, upselling, male-dominated garages I had worked in. 2 years later, that vision became Carter Street Garage, named not after my family, but after the street where the building sat. A run-down, forgotten little block with more potholes than traffic. I rented a shabby unit, painted the walls myself, bought used equipment, and opened with a promise written in marker on the front door. No hidden fees, no pressure, just honest car care. At first, it was slow. A few customers trickled in: college students, gig drivers, single moms who couldn't afford dealership pricing. But word of mouth spreads fast when people feel respected. I talked them through every issue, showed them replaced parts, offered payment plans, and built trust one conversation at a time. I created a small app that reminded customers when their oil change or tire rotation was due. Nothing fancy, but helpful. They loved it. Reviews started piling up. Then came contracts with delivery companies. The shop got busier. I hired one mechanic, then another. Meanwhile, not a single member of the Carter family ever visited. Not once. My dad would call occasionally, usually while driving between his stores, and ask in the same detached tone, "So, when are you done playing with cars?" Every time he said it, I imagined reaching through the phone and shaking him. "I'm not playing. This is my career, my business, my life." But I never said that. I just smiled through gritted teeth. My mother was worse. She would text me job listings, service advisor roles at luxury dealerships, administrative positions in corporate offices accompanied by passive-aggressive notes like "this would be a nice way to use your people skills." When I ignored them, she escalated. "At least wear a blazer when you talk to customers. You never know who might walk in." As if professionalism could be boiled down to fabric choices. What neither of them understood, what they never bothered to ask, was that my shop was doing better than fine. It wasn't glamorous, but it was profitable. I had a steady income, savings, and a growing community of customers who trusted me more than any fancy dealership. I didn't need Ryan's paycheck or Chloe's sponsored posts. I was building something real, quietly on the side. I started learning more. Instead of drinking wine at charity galas like my mother, I spent my nights studying finance, small business law, and real estate trends. I took online courses on commercial leases, LLC structures, and market cycles. Eventually, I created a small LLC, just me, no partners, and began looking for distressed properties in Dallas. Nothing big, nothing flashy, just buildings that had potential if someone cared enough to invest. That's how 18 months ago, I bought an old commercial building south of Knox Street. It was ugly, drafty, and needed more repairs than I could count. But it had bones, potential, a future. Back then, I had no idea how important that building would become. No idea that my parents would later rent that exact property. No idea that their entire Christmas would blow up because of it. And absolutely no idea that the thing they dismissed as a childish mechanic's hobby would one day hold the power to unravel their perfect image. But life is funny like that. Sometimes the dream they laugh at is the one that ends up saving you and exposing them. By the time November rolled around, Christmas had already begun growing like a storm cloud over the Carter household. And not just any Christmas this Christmas, the one my mom had been planning since July, the one she described in emails with subject lines like important holiday update and Carter family expectations. This year, relatives were flying in from Houston, Oklahoma, California, people I hadn't seen since childhood. Even my grandparents, now frail and slow-moving, were coming despite doctors' orders to avoid long trips. My mother kept saying it might be their last Christmas with all of us together, as though guilt were a seasoning she sprinkled on every conversation. On top of that, the pastor from our church had asked to film a segment called A Carter Family Christmas, which according to my mother would be used for some inspirational holiday montage during the Christmas Eve service. The idea of a camera crew inside our home documenting our smiles, our scripted laughter, our coordinated outfits was exactly the kind of thing my parents lived for and exactly the kind of thing that made my stomach twist. Then one evening in mid-November, my phone buzzed with a call from Mom. Her voice, strangely enough, was softer than usual, controlled, careful, the tone she used when she needed something. "Maya," she began. "This here is important, very important. We have family coming in from everywhere, and the church is filming a little piece about us. We need to show a united front." She paused as if searching for the right phrasing before finally adding, "No drama. No grease under the fingernails." Okay, I stared at my workbench while she talked, my hands still covered in motor oil from replacing brake pads. Grease under the fingernails. She said it like it was profanity, like I was a walking reminder of everything she wished she could Photoshop out of the family Christmas card. Still, some part of me, some naive, hopeful fragment I hadn't been able to kill, wanted to meet her halfway. Maybe because it had been a long year. Maybe because the garage had grown. Maybe because I had finally created stability for myself and wanted my family to see it. Or maybe because a small part of me still craved the approval I pretended not to care about. So, I told her, "Sure, Mom. I'll be there over the next week." I rearranged my entire life to make it happen. I asked one of my mechanics to take my holiday shifts so I could drive up to Plano early and help decorate. I organized the shop's workflow so customers wouldn't need me on Christmas Eve. I even bought a dress, nothing expensive, just a simple dark green one that fit nicely and didn't look like it belonged on the wrong side of a charity bin. I planned gifts, too. Not fancy ones, just thoughtful ones. I created custom emergency car kits for everyone. Tire pressure gauges, jumper cables, reflective triangles, small first aid pouches. It was something practical, something that came from my world, but could help them in theirs. I imagined handing them out with a little laugh just in case the highway doesn't care how perfect your Instagram photos look. I told myself this year would be different. That maybe my parents would see I wasn't some embarrassment they needed to tuck behind the Christmas tree. Maybe they'd realize that what I did for a living wasn't shameful. That keeping people safe on the road was just as meaningful as posing for a holiday video or running a fancy furniture store. And maybe they'd finally understand that success didn't always come wearing a blazer. Sometimes it came with dirty hands, a strong back, and a heart that wanted to help. But that hope, quiet, persistent, almost childish, kept me going. I imagined walking through their front door, not in work boots, but in my new dress. I imagined my mom smiling at me, not just politely, but genuinely. I imagined my dad asking about the garage, actually listening instead of nodding absently. I imagined Ryan cracking a real joke that didn't involve calling me the family mechanic and Chloe hugging me without glancing at whether her makeup smudged on my cheek. I imagined a Christmas where I wasn't a punchline. That tiny dream, simple, fragile, stupidly human, was enough to make me try again. Enough to make me pack my bags for Plano. Enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, this family would finally meet me halfway. But of course, I didn't know what was waiting for me. I didn't know what they were planning behind closed doors. I didn't know that while I was buying gifts for them, they were crafting a joke out of me. And I definitely didn't know that this would be the Christmas that broke us apart and saved me at the same time. By December 23rd, the house in Plano was already glowing like a Christmas showroom. Every window dripped with warm white lights. The front lawn had 3 identical reindeer, all perfectly symmetrical because in the Carter family, even the deer had to look coordinated. I arrived hours earlier than anyone expected, planning to help with decorations. Maybe even bond a little before the chaos of Christmas Eve. I parked behind my dad's Lexus, grabbed the box of custom emergency car kits from my back seat, and walked toward the front door with a strange flutter of optimism in my chest. Inside, the house smelled like cinnamon candles and pine needles, the soundtrack of classy Christmas playing softly in the background. My mom greeted me not with a hug, but with, "Oh, good. You're early. Can you take those basement decorations downstairs? They're stacked by the pantry." Her voice was brisk, already stressed, already focused on everything but me. Still, I nodded and headed toward the kitchen, passing the dining room on the way. That's when I heard it. Laughter, loud, unfiltered, the kind that usually filled this house only when the jokes were about somebody else. I froze when I heard my name in the middle of the noise. Maya. Instinctively, I stepped closer, stopping just outside the dining room door. It was cracked open, barely, just enough for voices to slip through. And what I heard next didn't just stop me, it hollowed me out. My mother's voice, syrupy and excited. "Pastor Jim wants a fun moment on camera for the church video. I thought we could do a little skit about Maya's career choices." But my father's laugh followed, deep and amused, like this was the best idea he'd heard all month. "We could have her wear that old mechanic jumpsuit," he said, still chuckling. "And maybe she could push in a toy car and pretend to change a tire. Meanwhile, the rest of us could read out loud all the opportunities she walked away from." More laughter. My breath caught in my throat. Then Chloe chimed in, her high voice, practically bubbling. "Ooh, and we could make a PowerPoint," she said. I could hear her clapping her hands like a child. First slide, Ryan, Dr. Carter. Second slide, Chloe, influencer and dental hygienist. Third slide, Maya, discount oil change queen. She giggled. "I have a bunch of old photos of her covered in grease. We can add memes." Ryan's voice came next, quieter, hesitant. I don't know if maybe that's a little, but my father cut him off with a snort. "Oh, relax. It's harmless fun. And honestly, maybe she needs it. She's almost 30 and still messing around with that garage. It's time she grows up." My mother added in her sugary faux sad tone. "Exactly. It'll be good for her. A gentle reminder that she has responsibilities. Plus, the church will love it." I pressed my hand to my mouth, trying to keep myself from making a sound. But it wasn't just a skit. No, what came next was the real blow. My mother lowered her voice, still audible through the door, and said, "After the skit, we'll read the will update. It's time she learns about consequences. If she refuses to contribute to the family in a meaningful way, then everything goes to Ryan. The house, the business, all of it. She'll still get a small amount, something symbolic like I was a charity case or a child who needed to be disciplined financially." I felt something inside me, something fragile crack. Ryan spoke again, voice strained. "Are we really doing the will thing in front of everyone? That feels public." But my father sighed in that frustrated, disappointed way he had perfected. "She needs this, Ryan. Otherwise, she'll keep believing that little garage of hers is enough. Enough. Enough for who? For them." I pressed my back against the wall, trying to stay upright. Then came the part one wasn't prepared for. My mother said, "Besides, we have to protect the family assets. Your father and I are already drowning trying to keep up with expenses. We've had to refinance the store building again. If we shift her out of the will now, the financial responsibility will fall on you and Chloe someday. but you two are successful enough to handle it, my father grumbled. Exactly. She can't pull her weight. Better to cut her loose before she drags us down. Cut me loose. Like I was dead weight. Like I was a liability, not a daughter. I don't know how long I stood there. The words blurred together after that. The laughter, the planning, the ease with which they spoke about turning me into entertainment, humiliating me in front of the entire extended family, the church, the camera crew, and then downing me financially as the grand finale. I felt cold. Not the kind that touches your skin, the kind that crawls under it. Slowly, I backed away from the door. My heartbeat was so loud, it drowned out everything else. When I reached the kitchen, the box of emergency car kits was still sitting on the counter, wrapped in red ribbons I had tied the night before. They looked stupid now, pathetic, like a child's project. They had been gifts, thoughtful ones, love offerings even. And all that time they were planning to turn me into a joke. My hands were shaking as I grabbed my bag. I didn't even bother telling anyone I was leaving. I walked out the back door, the cold air slamming into me like a second betrayal. By the time I reached my car, tears were already blurring my vision. I drove away without looking back. No one noticed. No one called. The truth hit me in waves as I reached the end of the street. I had shown up early to help decorate. They had been preparing a stage to laugh at me. And in that moment, the part of me that still hoped they might see my worth, that part snapped clean in half. I don't remember most of the drive after leaving my parents' house. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely keep the wheel steady. The holiday lights along the neighborhood blurred together, melting into streaks of red and green through my tears. At some point, instinct took over, and I pulled into the parking lot of a 247 gas station. One of those sad fluorescent islands that always looked the same, no matter the city or state. I parked crookedly in front of pump number 7 and let my forehead fall onto the steering wheel. The dam broke. I sobbed so hard my chest hurt. My breath shuddered, catching in the cold air. I couldn't drive. I couldn't think. The betrayal had sunk in fully now. Not just the humiliation plan, not just the slides and jokes, but the will. The way they justified cutting me out, the casual cruelty, the ease with which all my family had agreed that the best way to teach me something was to publicly shame me. I don't know how long I cried, minutes, hours. It felt like everything I'd tried to hold together my whole life was collapsing inside that cramped driver's seat. Eventually, when the sobs finally eased enough for me to breathe, I unlocked my phone with shaking hands. I didn't call my parents. I didn't call my siblings. I called the only person who had ever seen me without a mask, Lena. We'd been friends since college, met in a mutual suffering of a brutal thermodynamics class. While I went into autoing engineering, she went into accounting and then earned her CPA license. Over the years, she became the calm voice I needed, the one who helped me manage the finances for both the garage and the LLC. She knew everything about my work, my stress, my ambitions, everything real about me. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, you okay?" she asked, voice warm but alert, the tone she used whenever she sensed something was very wrong. I broke. No, I choked out. "I'm not okay. I'm not even close." What happened? So I told her, everything. The skit, the toy car, the PowerPoint, the will, the crowd, the laughter, the humiliation they were planning, the fact that they wanted to turn me into a moral example in front of the church. "They're going to humiliate me on camera," I whispered, my voice raw and cut me out of the will like a lesson, like some sermon illustration about a daughter who never lived up to their standard. Lena was silent for a long moment, but not the stunned, fragile silence my mother used. This was different, sharp, calculating. I pictured her sitting at her desk, glasses on, one hand pressed to her forehead as she processed every piece of information. Finally, she exhaled. "Okay, first I'm sorry, that's cruel and not normal parenting." Then her voice shifted into something firmer. "Second, you need to remember who you are. Maya, your garage is profitable. You have no debt. None. Do you hear me?" She didn't wait for me to answer. "And your LLC, your properties are appreciating. Your cash flow is stable. You are not the weak one here," I sniffed, wiping my eyes with the heel of my palm. "It doesn't feel like that." "I know," she said softly, "but feelings aren't facts." She took a breath. "And speaking of facts, remember that last building you bought 18 months ago? The commercial one owned by that older guy who wanted to retire." I frowned, still dazed. "Yeah, why do you remember which street it's on?" My mind scrambled through images, the deed, the photos, the inspection. "Knox Avenue," I murmured. "Right." Her voice sharpened. "Knox Avenue, Maya. That's the same building your dad's flagship store moved into last year. The one he said had shockingly reasonable rent." I sat up straight. No, 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 no. She continued. You own that building. You through your LLC. The world around me seemed to freeze. The humming gas pumps, the flickering street lights, the cold seeping through my jacket. All of it faded into a strange suspended silence. My voice cracked. I had no idea. Of course you didn't, Lena said gently. Because you never bragged about it. You bought the property quietly, repaired it, leased it out responsibly. You treated it like a business, not like an ego project. I pressed my hand over my mouth as the realization hit me like a tidal wave. My parents, the people berating me for not being successful, were renting their pride and joy flagship location from me. Their entire image, the one they weaponized against me, was being held up by something I built. And they didn't know. Lena wasn't finished. You've been charging them below market rate. They're late on payments. You've been unknowingly subsidizing them while they'd been plotting to humiliate you. I felt something shift inside my chest. Something fragile but strong, like a bone setting into place after being broken. All this time they had looked down on me, mocked me, dismissed me, reduced me to a punchline. While behind the scenes, my work, my garage, my savings, my business decisions was keeping them afloat. My tears dried slowly, replaced by a cold, clear focus I hadn't felt in years. Lena's voice softened again. Listen, if they want to teach you about consequences, maybe it's time they learned some, too. But not the way they planned. I stared out the windshield at the empty highway, the moonlight hitting the frost on the pavement. My reflection in the glass didn't look broken anymore, just tired. And awake, I whispered. If they want a lesson about consequences, I can give them one. Just not the way they planned. And for the first time that night, I felt steady. Not healed, not whole, but steady like the ground beneath me had finally stopped shaking. I spent the rest of that night sitting in my car outside the gas station, the cold seeping into my bones, while Lena stayed on the line with me, steady, calm, practical in the way only she could be. Certainly. Here is the text with all line breaks removed, as requested. Once my breathing evened out, she guided me step by step through what needed to happen next. And for the first time in my life, instead of shrinking under my family's judgment, I was about to confront it with truth and boundaries, two things they had never expected from me. The first thing we did was open the shared folder with all my LLC documents. Lena walked me through every clause of the commercial lease agreement, the one my parents had signed so casually, probably not even reading half of it, because they assumed the landlord would always be some faceless corporation, not their own daughter. My heart sank as we scrolled through the payment history. They had missed 2 consecutive rent installments, no communication, no partial payments, nothing. The system had automatically flagged them as being in breach of contract. Lena hummed thoughtfully. Okay, that gives us leverage. And look at this. She highlighted a paragraph in the lease. Your lease includes a clause allowing you to refuse renewal if notice is given by December 30th. It also allows you to increase rental market value if they're delinquent. I stared at the text, the words slowly clicking into place. My parents had treated me like a burden, a disappointment, a joke to be used in a holiday skit. Meanwhile, I had unknowingly been giving them a discount, subsidizing the very lifestyle they used to shame me. The irony burned. But this wasn't about revenge. Lena made sure I remembered that. We're not punishing them, she said gently. We're enforcing boundaries, ones they'd bulldozed your entire life. There's a difference. And she was right. For the first time ever, I wasn't acting from a place of wanting their approval. I wasn't scrambling to prove I was worth loving. I was simply stepping out from under them. We got to work. By 2:00 a.m., we had drafted the framework for what Lena jokingly called the Christmas gift. Though the truth was, it wasn't a gift. It was accountability wrapped in legal stationery. The real gift was clarity, the sort I wished I'd had years earlier. The plan was simple, clean, and painfully fair. 1. A formal letter from a licensed attorney, one of Lena's colleagues, would be delivered to my parents during Christmas Eve dinner. The timing wasn't vindictive. It was symbolic. They had chosen that night to humiliate me. I chose it to tell the truth. 2. The letter would state that the current lease would not be renewed after January 30th. If they wished to remain in the building past February 1st, they would need to sign a new lease at market value, an amount far higher than what they'd been paying. 3. The overdue rent 2 months' worth would need to be paid within 15 days. Sue. All guarantors listed on the original contract, my father, mother, and Ryan, were required to attend an in-person meeting with the attorney during the first week of January. Their signatures made them legally responsible. This wasn't punishment. This was business. 5. Attached to the packet, printed, clearly for everyone to see, would be the official beneficial ownership documents confirming that I, Maya Carter, was the sole owner of the Knox Avenue property. No theatrics, no name-calling, no sabotage, just facts laid out plainly, the way they never expected. When we finalized the draft, Lena paused. Maya, before we send this, I need to ask you something. I braced myself. What? Do you want to do this because you're hurt or because you're ready to stop letting them hurt you? Her question hit me harder than anything my family had ever thrown at me, because the truth was, I wanted both. I was hurt, devastated, shattered. But beneath all of that was a quiet, steady truth. I was finally ready to stop letting them treat me like the family clown. I swallowed. I'm ready, I said softly. Then one more thing, she replied. I want you to schedule an appointment with a therapist. Not because you're broken, but because what you're doing is big, and you deserve someone who can help you stay grounded through it. Surprisingly, I didn't resist. I made the appointment before dawn. The next morning, instead of packing for Plano, I packed for Colorado. I rented a small Airbnb cabin outside Greenwich. Nothing fancy, just wood, warmth, and quiet. Then I started making calls to the people who had become my real support system. The single moms whose cars I'd fixed for free during the pandemic. The delivery drivers who always brought me coffee before their morning routes. The gig workers who trusted me when no other shop took them seriously. A few friends from Austin. And of course, Lena. I told them I wasn't spending Christmas alone this year. They showed up without hesitation. And that's when it clicked. Family isn't the people who share your last name. Family is the people who show up when you're falling apart. As I drove toward Colorado with snow beginning to dust the highway, I whispered to myself, more affirmation than declaration. If they chose to make me the punchline, I choose to stop being part of the joke. I would no longer sit at tables where I was the entertainment. I would no longer beg for love dressed as approval. I would no longer shrink myself to fit a role written for everyone but me. This Christmas, I wasn't running away. I was choosing where I belonged. And it wasn't in a dining room in Plano with a camera pointed at me. It was in a cabin in Colorado with people who saw me as human, not a prop. Christmas Eve arrived like two completely different worlds unfolding at the exact same time. In Plano, at the Carter house, the night gleamed with the kind of curated perfection that only my mother could orchestrate. Candles glowed in every window. Wreaths hung with surgical symmetry. And the giant Christmas tree shimmered for the camera crew from the church who were already moving tripods around the living room. Someone was adjusting microphones. Another was testing the lighting. The Carter Christmas was as always a production. My mother floated through the house wearing a deep red dress, her smile tight but camera ready. Whenever someone asked where I was, she tilted her head in that dramatic sad way she'd perfected. Oh Maya, she sighed, she's just so busy with that garage. You know how mechanics are around the holidays, but we're trying to keep the joy alive. The martyrdom in her voice was almost a performance of its own. Chloe, meanwhile, was in full influencer mode. She live-streamed little snippets of the house, the dessert table, the perfectly wrapped presents, the decorative archway of poinsettias. It's family night, she chirped to her followers, her face glowing with filters. Then she added lightly, well, most of the family, and let the camera linger just long enough on the empty chair that was meant for me. Some people just don't value nights like this. I guess the comments flooded in with sympathetic emojis and messages about letting go of toxic siblings. Back in Colorado, the world looked nothing like Plano's staged elegance. The cabin I'd rented flickered with warm string lights, mismatched mugs of hot cocoa, and the chaos of a dozen people trying to cook in a tiny kitchen. Lena wore an ugly sweater with a reindeer whose eyes crossed when she moved. One of the delivery drivers I'd supported during the summer showed up with tamales from his mom. Two single moms, Sarah and Bree, brought their kids, who were now building a lopsided gingerbread house on the coffee table. My hands still smelled faintly of engine oil from fixing Bry's flat tire earlier that afternoon. No one minded. No one looked embarrassed. In fact, one of the guys laughed and said, "Hey, Maya, you mind showing me how to check my winter tires later? I want to make sure I survive this mountain." I nodded and smiled. This place, this group, felt more like family than anything waiting for me in Plano. We played music. We cooked. We teased each other. And for a little while, I forgot that hundreds of miles away, a different kind of Christmas was spiraling toward a moment I had set in motion. Until it happened. At the Carter house, right as everyone finished their first round of dessert, and the pastor's team gave a nod that the cameras were rolling again, the doorbell rang. My mother's face lit up. Delivery boxes on Christmas Eve usually meant gifts from donors, special church contributions, or something equally flattering. "Oh, let's bring it in. They can film this, too." "Holiday generosity," she chirped. A young courier stepped inside, shivering in the Texas cold. "Delivery for the Carter family," he said, holding out a stack of large white envelopes stamped with a law firm logo. My mother accepted them with a smile so bright it could have hosted a charity gala. She opened the first envelope right there at the table, expecting a check, a thank you letter, something she could wave proudly at the cameras. Instead, her face stiffened, her eyes darted across the page. Confusion slid into dread so quickly it drained the color from her cheeks. "Thomas," she whispered, voice cracking. "Read this." My father took the letter, scanning it with growing horror. The first page alone was enough to darken the room. A formal notice of default, a list of overdue rent payments, an official termination of the lease effective January 30th. The pastor, the relatives, the church volunteers, they all watched as my father's hand began to shake. My mother grabbed another envelope, ripping it open with trembling fingers. Inside was a packet of legal documents, proof of beneficial ownership, contracts, LLC filings, page after page showing that the Knox Avenue building, their flagship store, the pride of their business, the one they'd bragged about, switching to because of its amazing rate, was owned by one person, Maya Carter. They read the name aloud, loud enough for the whole room to hear, loud enough that the cameraman lowered his equipment, unsure whether to keep filming or not. The silence was suffocating. My father blinked at the page like it had betrayed him. "Maya, Maya," he stammered as if the idea was impossible. My mother dropped her wine glass. It shattered across the hardwood floor. She didn't even flinch. Grandma leaned forward, squinting. "Is that our Maya? Mechanic Maya?" Chloe's live stream cut off instantly. Ryan whispered, "Oh God." Relatives exchanged looks, some of disbelief, some of fascination, some of respect. Pastor Jim glanced between my parents, unsure if he should pray or back away slowly. The perfect Carter Christmas had cracked open like an egg. Messy, raw, unfiltered. The family who cared so deeply about image had been exposed in front of the very people whose approval they worshiped. And all it took was the truth. Hundreds of miles away in the warmth of the Colorado cabin, my phone began vibrating on the kitchen counter. Call after call after call. The screen lit up with Mom, then Dad, then Chloe, then Ryan, then home phone, then Mom again. Lena looked at me with raised brows. "Showtime. Want to answer?" I took a breath, savoring the moment. The pie was cooling on the counter. Laughter echoed from the living room. Snow tapped against the windows like soft fingers. I smiled, picked up the pie server, and said, "Not yet. We haven't cut the pie." And for the first time in years, I felt something that had nothing to do with revenge. I felt free. By the time the last of the dishes were washed, and the kids had fallen asleep on the couch, wrapped in mismatched blankets, the Colorado night had settled into a deep, peaceful, quiet. Snow drifted steadily outside, landing softly on the wooden railing of the cabin's porch. My friends were still inside, laughing over a card game. But I needed a moment alone, not to prepare because everything that needed to happen had already happened, but to breathe. I stepped onto the porch, letting the cold, sharp air sting my cheeks and steady my heartbeat. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and when I pulled it out, the screen glowed with a notification that almost made me laugh. "Mom says missed calls." Of course, the display blinked again. Another incoming call. This time, I answered. Her voice tore through the line instantly, raw and furious. "How dare you ambush us like this on Christmas? In front of the church? In front of your grandparents? Do you have any idea what you've done?" I leaned against the railing, watching snowflakes dissolve on the wood. Her rage didn't shake me the way it used to. Maybe because I'd finally realized it wasn't actually about love or disappointment. It was about control. "Where are you?" I asked calmly. The question threw her off. "Where are we?" "We're at home, of course, trying to salvage what's left of this evening. Your father is in shambles. The whole family is asking questions. And Pastor Jim, did you enjoy my gift?" I asked gently. Silence cracked through the air like ice splitting on a lake. Then she roared, "Gift? Gift? That wasn't a gift. Maya, that was a betrayal. You humiliated us. You ruined the night. I cut her off. "Mom, let's not pretend you know what betrayal feels like tonight." "Oh, don't you dare," she snapped. "You ungrateful child. We have given you everything. And this is how you repay us? By blindsiding your own family on Christmas. By sending lawyers bank notices. Do you know people were crying? Your grandmother nearly fainted. We looked like fools." I inhaled slowly. This was the moment where the old me would fold, apologize, shrink, blame herself. But that version of me was gone. "Mom," I said quietly, "you're angry at the consequences, not the truth. We were trying to help you." She screamed. "That little skit was supposed to motivate you. It was meant to be funny." Funny. My voice remained steady. A PowerPoint calling me discount oil change queen is funny. Making me push a toy car in front of the church cameras is funny. Cutting me out of the will on film is funny. Funny. That was for God's sake, Maya. That was a lesson. You need direction. You refused to listen. You chose that mechanic life and we were just trying to what? I asked to shame me into being someone you can brag about. She hesitated and that hesitation was all the answer I needed. I continued, my voice calm but razor sharp. Let's talk about the will and the skit and the jokes. You wanted to humiliate me publicly as a moral lesson for the church, but I'm the one who betrayed you. She tried again. You misunderstood. No, I said, cutting her off with a firmness I had never used before. I understood perfectly, and so did the entire family when they read the letters. I paused, letting the weight sink in. You know what's funny, Mom? My voice softened, not out of kindness, but clarity. I bought that building 18 months ago. The one your flagship store is in. The old landlord retired and wanted someone responsible to take over. I repaired the plumbing. I upgraded the wiring. I kept the rent low for tenants who needed a break, including you. She sucked in a breath, sharp, disbelieving. You're lying. I'm not. I replied. I gave you below market rent. I said nothing when you were late on payments. I stayed silent because I thought even if you didn't respect my career, I could still help the family. Quietly, her voice faltered. You bought Maya? Why would you? Why didn't you tell us? Because every time I talk about my accomplishments, you act like they're mistakes. Her silence was louder than her shouting, and then predictably, she pivoted to gaslighting. We were joking. Maya, you always take things so personally. You know we love you. You know we didn't mean this isn't love, I said. And it wasn't a joke. A joke is mutual. A joke is harmless. A joke doesn't involve stripping your daughter from the will on camera to make her look like a failure. You're overreacting, she snapped. And if you go through with this, raising the rent, canceling the lease, your father's business will suffer. People will ask questions. You'll ruin the family name. I almost laughed. Mom, you already ruined the family name. I just stopped covering for it. I stopped subsidizing everything in silence. Her breathing turned into something frantic. Panicked. So what now? You think you can threaten us with buildings and lawyers? You think you can win? I'm not trying to win. I said, I'm asking for respect. I'm asking for boundaries. You won't give them willingly. So now they're written into legal documents. You have 30 days to vacate or renegotiate at the actual market rate. I'm not punishing you. I'm just done setting myself on fire to keep you warm. She was silent for a moment. I could hear voices in the background. Relatives whispering, the pastor muttering, my father pacing. Then she screamed again, her voice cracking under the strain. This conversation isn't over. Maya, you hear me? I felt the last piece of my fear dissolve. For me, I said softly. It actually is. I'm saying. I let the quiet stretch for a heartbeat. Merry Christmas, Mom. Then I hung up. My hand trembled slightly, but for the first time, not from fear, from release. The snow kept falling around me, gentle and indifferent, and I realized I had never felt lighter. In the weeks that followed Christmas Eve, the Carter family scandal spread through Plano faster than tinsel in a winter storm. Word traveled from cousin to cousin, pew to pew, neighbor to neighbor. And it didn't matter that no one had posted a video or shared the documents publicly. The story had been witnessed in real time by enough people for it to ripple outward like a quiet earthquake. Some chose sides. Some stayed neutral. Some pretended not to care while leaning forward eagerly to hear every detail. What surprised me most was that the reactions weren't what my parents had expected. A handful of church members and family friends defended them, wringing their hands and saying things like, Maya shouldn't have embarrassed her parents like that, especially on Christmas. But more than a few whispered a different question, a sharper one that cut through the polite surface. Why did they feel the need to teach a lesson to their grown daughter in front of the entire family? And since when is public humiliation a form of parenting? The question hovered in the air every Sunday at church, every family dinner, every volunteer night at the community center. My parents hated that question more than they hated my ambush, more than they hated the overdue payments being made public. Because for the first time, the narrative wasn't shaping in their favor. A week after Christmas, my father finally broke the silence. He didn't call. He sent an email, a long one, pages long, a full financial assessment, as he titled it, outlining profits, losses, and projections for the future of his furniture stores. He wrote about supply chain delays, seasonal downturns, and unforeseen financial pressures he believed justified why I should lower the rent instead of raising it. He ended with, families should support each other. We are asking you to reconsider the new lease terms for the sake of family unity. I didn't take the bait. I replied with 4 sentences. Dad, thank you for the update. Please forward all business inquiries to the attorney. handling the Knox Avenue lease. I extended discounted rent for 18 months as a personal courtesy, and now we are simply aligning with standard market value. Wishing you the best moving forward. It was the first time in my life I had responded to him without explaining, defending, or apologizing. He didn't reply. A few days later, Ryan called. He didn't bother with greetings. "What the hell were you thinking?" he snapped the moment I answered. "Do you even realize what you've done to Dad?" He's furious. "The whole family is." I cut him off. "Do you realize what you all planned for me?" He hesitated. "Planned for you? It was just a skit," I said slowly. "A joke, a PowerPoint, a costume publicly cutting me from the will. All of it." I heard everything on the 23rd, Ryan, every word. Silence. Then in a much smaller voice. I didn't know it would be like that. I thought it was just some silly church video. Mom said it was motivational. I didn't realize they were going to, well, humiliate me, strip my inheritance, turn me into a parabi. He didn't say the words, but the guilt in his voice filled them in. For the first time in years, Ryan didn't defend them. He didn't defend himself either. He just sighed. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I didn't know." And I believed him, not because I wanted to, but because Ryan had never been a mastermind. He went along with things, even bad things, because life was easier when he didn't question it. But that didn't make it hurt any less. Chloe, on the other hand, reacted exactly as expected. She didn't call. She didn't text. Instead, she posted cryptic Instagram stories with captions like, "Some people betray blood, and not everyone deserves a seat at your table." Always vague, always just subtle enough to deny if asked. She kept her brand polished, victimized, but elegant, wronged, but glowing. I ignored every post, but not everyone stayed silent. 2 cousins I barely talked to messaged me privately, saying they didn't support the way my parents treated me, even if they didn't want to be dragged into the drama. An aunt sent me a single sentence. "You deserved better that night." It wasn't much, but it was something. Meanwhile, in my world, the world outside the Carter performance, the consequences were wildly different. When people in my customer base heard what had happened, many reached out with small kindnesses, cards, cookies, tips, referrals, even little notes like, "Keep your head up, Maya. You're one of the good ones." The garage got busier. New customers came in saying things like, "Heard you're the honest mechanic in town," or, "My cousin told me what happened." You deserve better. Word spread not about scandal, but about strength. By mid-January, the garage had its best month since opening, and Lena and I, with more confidence than ever, began looking seriously at acquiring a second property. Not to rescue anyone, not to prove anything, not because I owed my family a safety net, but because it made sense for the business, because I could, because I had built something worth expanding. For the first time in my life, my decisions weren't influenced by fear of disappointing them. I wasn't shrinking or compensating or apologizing. I was finally living without their approval. And I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. And yet, even with the peace that came from stepping away, I could sense a shift coming, something quieter, something that wasn't about contracts or consequences or Christmas scandals. The next chapter wasn't about punishing my family. It was about rebuilding myself. And that truth would become clearer 1 year later on another snowy winter night. A full year passed, not quietly, not cleanly, but steadily, like a long exhale after decades of holding my breath. Winter returned to Plano and Dallas and Colorado, and with it came the small, subtle signs of how much life had shifted since that explosive Christmas Eve. My parents had moved their flagship store out of the sleek Knox Avenue building months earlier, settling instead into a smaller, more modest location tucked between a strip mall nail salon and a tax accounting office. No more billboards, no more grand holiday launches. They didn't say it aloud, but I knew the truth. Reputations were easier to rebuild than balance sheets. Pride was harder to swallow than new rent. They still didn't talk to me much. The communication remained strictly transactional. Occasional emails about forwarded mail or a stray tax document. Nothing cruel, nothing warm, just neutral, polite, distant. My mother's sentences were shorter now. My father's. Punctuation more careful. It felt like watching 2 people learn a language they'd never had to speak before. Accountability. Ryan broke away from their orbit entirely. A few months after Christmas, he opened his own orthopedic clinic in a modest medical plaza, no longer under my father's shadow or pressure. On the day he signed the lease, he sent me a short text. "I'm doing this on my own. Just wanted you to know I wished him luck." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Chloe kept up her influencer life, posing in matching pajama sets and posting skincare hauls. But every now and then she shared something oddly introspective. A caption like, "Family is complicated and growth is messy," or a selfie with a long paragraph about learning to see people beyond their labels. It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Maybe her version of thinking. My world, though, it bloomed. By late summer, my garage had grown so steadily that I opened a second small location. Nothing extravagant. Just enough room for 3 lifts, 2 new hires, and a tiny break room with a microwave that only worked when you slammed the door just right. Lena helped me manage payroll, taxes, and the endless sea of paperwork I still hadn't gotten used to. Our free winter check program for single moms and low-income drivers became an annual tradition. One people in the community now anticipated, even volunteered for. I moved, too, out of my small apartment near downtown Dallas and into a little house with its own garage, sun-faded siding, squeaky floors, and a yard that needed more work than I could ever finish. I renovated it piece by piece, sanding cabinets at midnight, replacing old pipes, rewiring the garage door myself. Every improvement felt like reclaiming something, a life, a home, a self. Emotionally, I kept going to therapy. I kept learning slowly, stubbornly, that worth didn't come from being the daughter my parents wanted. That family wasn't a prize you earned. And most importantly, that growing up sometimes meant unlearning every story you were told about who you were allowed to be. Christmas returned faster than I expected. This year, I didn't even pretend to consider going to Plano. Instead, I drove back to the same cabin in Colorado, the place where everything had cracked open and begun again. But this time, the gathering was bigger, louder, warmer. Lena came, of course, so did a couple of my regular customers who had become friends. The 7-year-old apprentice from my shop Mina joined too, excitedly showing off the first car she had rebuilt herself. A few new friends arrived, people I'd met along the way. A delivery driver, a nurse, a school teacher, people who had no reason to show up besides the fact that they wanted to. People who didn't care what I wore or how clean my hands were. We cooked again, laughed louder, repeated the same silly tradition we'd invented the year before, sharing one moment from the year when we chose ourselves instead of someone else's expectations. When it was nearly over, when the fire had died down to glowing embers and the sky outside had turned the deep navy blue of a mountain winter, I reached for my phone to check the time. That's when I saw it. An email from Dad. Just one line. No drama, no anger, no self-righteousness. Business is stable. We signed a fair lease on the new place. Ryan says your shop is doing well. I heard about your free winter checks. That's good work. Good work. Not a compliment. Not entirely, but not a criticism either. It was the closest thing he'd ever sent to an acknowledgement. A small crack in the armor he'd spent years polishing. A sliver of humanity in the man who once called me a disappointment in a grease-stained uniform. I didn't cling to it. I didn't build fantasies around it. I simply smiled softly, quietly, and typed back. I'm glad you're stable. I hope one day we can talk without turning each other into lessons. No pressure, no edge, no expectation, just truth. Later, that night, I stepped onto the same porch where I'd stood a year ago under the same drifting snow in the same mountain quiet. But everything felt different. Inside were people laughing. People who chose to be here not because of obligation, not because of blood, not because a pastor wanted a perfect holiday video. They were here because in some strange unexpected way, we'd become a family, a chosen one. And as I leaned against the railing, watching the snow settle over the pines, I realized something I had never understood before. Losing my family hadn't ended my story. It had given me back the pen. I inhaled, exhaled, and finally said, not to anyone in particular, but to myself, to the cold night, and to whoever needed to hear it. Last Christmas, I thought losing my family would be the end of everything. Turns out it was the beginning of my own story. Sometimes the kindest gift you can give yourself is to stop sitting at tables where you're the punchline. Then, as the cabin door opened, behind me and warm light spilled across the snow, I smiled and added, if you've ever been made into a joke by your own family, remember this. You were never born to be a prop in their performance. You deserve your own story. And where are you listening from? And what time is it right now? Tell me. Because maybe, just maybe, this Christmas, we've become part of each other's chosen family.